Hey, okay, part two. I'm just settling in for a nap. I get this. You need to say more than that. Okay, okay. All right, whatever you like. And that is, who the hell cares whether the throne, the crown, the monarch, the queen, the king teaches about leadership or not? What difference does it make? The people do what the people do. Well, not really. Okay. Why the queen has to speak principles of leadership to the people is because English law has a point of view. Common English law is a law of the land. It's a law about if you do a good thing, you should get a good outcome. And if you refrain from doing a harmful thing, you should get a good outcome. And if you've done a bad thing, you have to be corrected and put back on the road to doing good things and good outcomes. That is what English law is about. It's built on the Mosaic law, the laws of Yahweh, and the Code of Hammurabi, and the Brehon law system. Now, the Brehon law system from Ireland and Scotland was a verbal law system. It was never written down. It was all transmitted orally. And that's why when the Romans came through, they obliterated Brehon law because the Romans wrote everything down. Romans were the ultimate mercantile commercial empire. They had slavery, they had exploitation, they had bribery, they had double dealing, and they had divide and conquer, culture against culture. They were constantly warring. That was their culture. And so they wrote everything down. And if things became more and more and more cumbersome, the way they've become here. That's why the British monarch has to speak to the principles embodied in the oath that the monarch delivers. All right. That's why the monarch has to back English law. And English law is not commercial. It is not commerce. It is not UCC codes or administrative codes or Maritime Admiralty codes. English law is laws of the land. That's number one. Okay, English culture. For the past umpteen years, the birth rate of the British Isles has been below 2.0 kids per marriage, per holy matrimony, per family. And so there have not been enough children to create the workforce to fill all the jobs. And so Britain has been filling the jobs by flooding Britain with immigrants from countries that have more kids, too many kids, and so they come to Britain to find work. Well, I guess there's nothing wrong with that because there are a lot of wonderful, sincere working people from other countries. But when the floodgates begin to drive people in whose only objective is to live on the dole and to get a free ride and to stay home and complain, well, then that creates a problem, duh. All right. When the immigrants start saying, well, we don't like your culture, we don't like the way you dress, we don't like your music, we don't like your, well, then it's time for some guidance here, duh. See what I'm saying? But finally, the church. And this is where I get a little hot under the collar, okay? Because going back to Edward VII, Edward VII, because Victoria embraced the occult after Albert died and after Albert Victor was disappeared. And he was disappeared because he ended up at Glamis Castle in Scotland and lived out his life there and died in 1931. At least that's what my dad knew. And that's why my dad was in loggerheads against his dad, because his dad wasn't supposed to be king. His dad was the Duke of York, the second born. Okay, so Edward VII didn't take the church that seriously in terms of his relationships with women. George V had another agenda. He was primarily a Mason who was obligated to Alfred de Rothschild for what Alfred de Rothschild knew about George V's illegitimate eldest son, whose name was Adolf Hitler, and who was conceived at the Order of the Bath in Frankfurt, Germany, on June the 21st, 1888, during George V's initiation into the Order of the Bath. And the maid was a Rothschild maid who worked at the Alfred de Rothschild estate. And so Alfred de Rothschild held that over George V's head his whole time. In 1902, Alfred de Rothschild gave George V a little medal in commemoration of the secret that he held against George V. Okay, so George V was a figurehead who took vows to do one thing, but who was obligated to Alfred de Rothschild. He was obligated to the Zionists, otherwise he would be blackmailed. He was being blackmailed. Okay. So George V was split in his obligations. All right. And he always went through the motions of being connected to the church. However, his archbishop, I think the guy's name was Baldwin, about the time that Edward VIII came of age and was ready to take over as king. George V fed the archbishop rumors and slander about Edward so that Baldwin cut Edward off. It was all really ugly. It was 1921 when George V helped Kaiser Wilhelm to found Tavistock on the belief or the intention to outwit war, okay, and to create methods for programming people that would enable innocent citizens to not be harmed by what they had to do in war. And so it's all about surreptitious deceit and treachery is what Tavistock is about. Say you're doing one thing and do something else, okay? Create yourself a protection racket so you're safe, you know, whether it's money laundering or charity fraud or whatever, all right? So George V was not about standing for the principles of honesty, never was. And Edward was caught between his half-brother, Adolf Hitler's fascist National Socialist occult ideology and his father's Zionist obligations. And he said, I can't do anything with this. This is not, it's the same fight now between the occult fascist faction and the Zionist Talmudic, okay, rich people faction. We have these two factions that are getting the rest of us to fight. This is crazy. And so when the throne got handed down to Elizabeth, I think, it's just my opinion, I think she was clueless about all this stuff. And he was used to going through the motions and being nice and making nice and doing what she was told and being obedient and just going along with the program. And the program was National Fascist Zionism, right? And that's why Elizabeth II has looked at Israel with a blind eye as to their ethics, and looked at banksterism and usury and exploitation and slavery with a blind eye, because that's what's always been going on around her. Now, what a monarch has to do is integrate and cohere all of these perspectives. The law has to be coherent with the spiritual ideology, which has to be coherent with the cultural ethos. It all has to work together so that behavior has reasons, okay? National behavior has to have reasons for it. That makes sense in terms of laws of cause and effect. Now, Elizabeth II never went to seminary. I don't know if she ever got into Bible study or into the larger literature of scriptures and channelings and tomes like the Oahspe and the Urantia book and profane histories and ETs and Anunnaki and all of that. I don't know if she ever got into that. But it seems to me that unless we understand the personality of the galaxy that our planet, our world exists in, and we do that by the treaties. We look at the content of the treaties and see what the treaties allow and see what the treaties exclude. Now, the Elanu Treaty and the Greada Treaty and the Tau 9 Treaty all exclude human rights as if human rights don't exist. All right, so do human rights exist? Well, not in Maritime Admiralty law, not in UCC codes, not in administrative codes. Human rights do not exist in commerce. That's why slavery is okay and private prisons are okay and child sex trafficking is okay and money laundering and offshore accounts and all of that treacherous manipulation, it's all okay because nobody notices, nobody cares what's actually going on. If Elizabeth II had been a serious monarch, she would have attended seminary. She would have been addressing the priests with the principles of behavior as elucidated by holy law, by Jesus Christ, and even by the Virgin Mary, because the Virgin Mary has a whole culture that the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church take seriously, but Protestantism just, oh, that's idolatry. Well, matriarchy is a valid culture, folks. The position of the woman in a family to get the kids to behave decently and civilly is not trivial. But Elizabeth never did that. She never required that her ministers or that her departments or that the Home Office or that MI5 or MI6 or any of those UK departments in her government, she never required that they act in a civil, honest, and decent manner. And this is why it was fine with MI5 or MI6, all right, when my half-sister Elizabeth was born in 1934 to Wallace Warfield Simpson. She was just shunted off into the adoption market and ended up in Tennessee in a poor family. And then when Margaret, my sister born in 1939, who was actually legitimately the daughter of Edward and Claudia Ruth O'Keefe, when she was born, a year and a half later, she was dumped into Alabama, into a poor family that really abused her. And when I came along in 1944, and Claudia was at this point 45, and she couldn't deal with a sick child, I got dumped in the adoption market and ended up in the foster family in San Francisco. And MI5 and MI6 think this is just fine, no problem. They'll do anything for a monarch, whether it is based in an ethical understanding of not only law, but fairness and equity and decency. But you see, the Windsors haven't been standing for fairness and equity and decency. And Queen Elizabeth II never took up the charge to keep people honest and decent, because that's the mother's role. That's the role of the matriarch, to make everybody mind. And so that's the part of the message that I didn't put up last time when I talked about tyranny and how it doesn't just go away by itself. Tyranny has to be dismantled. And the first thing that has to go is the mainstream media that lies to us all about everything. And academia lies to us about a lot of stuff, okay? And Big Pharma has a false front, and the Allopathic school has a false front, and geology and geography have their stories, and astronomy has their stories. And so we, the people, are left with a curriculum of bullshit fables and doctrines and dogmas that don't relate to what's true. And it's the job of the monarch, of the president, of the CEO, to clear up everybody's thoughts and intentions and focus on what is true and real and where we're going. And that never happened in Britain from the time that George V founded and funded Tavistock in 1921. Britain adopted Luciferianism, and its leadership separated from the monarchy. The state went one direction, and the monarchy went into suspended animation. And that's why I keep bringing this stuff up, because what I'm hearing and getting from the ancient histories and from the ethic of Jesus Christ and from the holy law and from the serious study of matriarchy in the Catholic and Orthodox churches is that Christianity is cut into pieces, and the pieces are set against each other, and that's not working. So when are we going to get ourselves pulled together so we're paying attention to what's true? We need to do that, okay? And so what's true is tyranny cannot just fade away. It has to be demolished. Now, who's going to do it? Who's going to put the bell on the old cat's tail? Donald Trump is trying. Now, who's going to help him? Who's going to help him drain the swamp? Because the swamp's not just in the US. The swamp is in the city of London. It's in the banking system. All right. It's in the drug running and the gun running and the sex trafficking. That's a lot of swamp to take apart. But we have to do it. Okay. That is our charge in this generation, to drain the swamp. Bye-bye.